The night was warm, with a soft breeze brushing against the brick sidewalks of downtown Dallas, carrying the faint aroma of grilled steaks and roasted coffee from nearby restaurants. Streetlights cast an amber glow over parked cars, their reflections dancing across the windows of shops that had long since closed. Traffic moved steadily, but with a calm rhythm, the occasional honk punctuating the ambient hum of the city. It was the kind of evening that felt ordinary, peaceful even, but Anthony Rhodess knew better than to assume life ever stayed ordinary for long. He and Denise stepped out of Papa's Brothers Steakhouse, the last vestiges of laughter from their quiet dinner lingering between them. Anthony adjusted the cuffs of his button-up shirt, feeling the familiar weight of his keys in his pocket. He smiled faintly at Denise, who was swaying slightly on her heels, balancing her purse with a casual elegance only she could carry. "You ever going to let yourself relax for one night?" she teased, her eyes glinting with warmth and mild exasperation. Anthony chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Relaxing is how you miss what's right in front of you," he replied, scanning the street as if his life depended on noticing every detail, which, in a way, it did. Years in law enforcement had taught him to see patterns in the ordinary, the rhythm of footfalls, the way a car eased into a parking space, the subtle tension in the air that most people ignored. Tonight, however, he wanted nothing more than to let the world fall away for a few hours, to forget the calls, the paperwork, the endless decisions that had to be made for a city that rarely slept. Denise smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know, for someone who carries the entire department on his shoulders, you make it look easy." Her voice softened, a mix of pride and worry. Anthony reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "It's not easy," he said quietly, "but it's necessary." There was a pause, a shared understanding in the silence between them, the kind of quiet that only comes when two people have lived through enough together to read the unspoken. They made their way toward the black Chevy Tahoe parked a few steps from the curb, away from the valet line. Anthony unlocked the doors, glancing once down the street, as if making sure the world outside remained predictable. Denise followed, her steps hesitant but trusting. She had spent enough time watching Anthony navigate the world to know that his calm exterior masked a mind always calculating, always prepared. And yet tonight, she wanted him to simply be Anthony, not the chief, not the protector, just a man walking beside the woman he loved. The city hummed around them. A group of college students laughed near the corner, a delivery driver rolled a cart down the sidewalk, and a man walked his dog slowly, the leash slack between them. Anthony noted it all, a silent exercise, almost meditative. The ordinary details brought him comfort, a reminder that not every night was chaos, not every street held danger. Denise leaned closer, her voice teasing again. "You've got to let someone else carry the weight sometimes, you know?" Anthony smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the night and the gentle presence of his wife beside him. "Maybe," he said, "but tonight I'm just trying to get home." His tone was light, but beneath it there was a vigilance that refused to be ignored. And then, in the periphery of his vision, red and blue lights flickered across the street. A patrol car slowed, tires hissing softly against the asphalt, and Anthony's calm, ordinary night began to shift. The world he had counted on as predictable seemed to tremble for the first time, and the city's quiet rhythm became the heartbeat of something entirely different, something urgent, something that demanded every ounce of patience and restraint he possessed. Denise instinctively gripped his arm, her eyes widening as the car doors opened with a metallic clang. Anthony felt the familiar surge of awareness, the old instincts kicking in, not for himself, but for the woman beside him. He lifted his hands slightly, keeping his voice calm. "Stay close, Denise. Let me handle this," he said, though even he could feel the weight of what was about to unfold pressing against the night air. The ordinary evening had ended. A night that began with laughter and quiet love had shifted, and Anthony Rhodess, seasoned, aware, and calm, braced himself for the moment that would test every principle he had ever held. The street seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, knowing that tonight even the familiar could betray you. Anthony's hands were still raised, the faint glow of the streetlights reflecting off his skin when the first officer stepped toward him. There was a rhythm to the approach, deliberate and practiced, the kind of movement drilled into every recruit. But Anthony had seen it all before. He knew the choreography of control, the hand on the holster, the subtle pressure in the shoulders, the voice sharp and unyielding. He kept his own stance measured, palms open, his body relaxed but ready, the calm of decades in law enforcement a quiet shield. The officer's voice cut through the night like a whip. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." The words were not a question. They were a command, confident in their authority. assuming compliance without consideration. Anthony complied immediately, turning his body slightly toward the Tahoe, making sure Denise stayed safely behind him. She froze near the sidewalk, her fingers gripping her phone as though it were a lifeline. Anthony's eyes swept across the patrol car, taking in every detail. The scuffed boots of the younger officer, the way his partner's flashlight hooked slightly in his grip, the tension in their shoulders that betrayed the unspoken anxiety beneath their bravado. He noticed the older officer first, the one whose face was lined with experience but whose eyes lacked the depth of understanding. Subtle arrogance hovered there, like a shadow that wouldn't lift. Anthony recognized it immediately, the kind of confidence that comes from power untested, from never having seen the world from the side of fear rather than authority. "Sir, hands behind your back!" the younger officer barked, stepping closer. Anthony's pulse didn't quicken, his mind did. He considered every possible reaction, every way this could spiral into violence, and reminded himself that patience was a weapon. "Officer," he said calmly, his voice low and even, "I'm cooperating. I've done nothing wrong. There's no reason for escalation." The older officer leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Tall male, dark vehicle, leaving the area of a robbery." The words hung in the air like smoke, insidious in their simplicity. Anthony felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the knowledge that this wasn't personal, not yet. It was a product of assumptions. The assumption that a black man in the city, walking to his car at night, was inherently suspicious. He knew that moment well, the one where fear and prejudice combined to become a lens that distorted reality. Denise's voice cracked across the distance, trembling but determined. "He hasn't done anything. That's my husband. Look at him." Her plea carried over the low hum of traffic, over the distant laughter from the college students, over the soft breeze. Anthony's heart ached at the sound, but he stayed rooted, aware that any sudden movement could tip the balance. The younger officer's hand shot forward, gripping Anthony's wrist with unexpected force. The older officer pressed against his back, and suddenly the calm Anthony had cultivated was met with undeniable pressure. He was pushed against the hood of the Tahoe, the cold metal biting into his cheek. Denise gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Anthony exhaled through his nose, steadying himself, reminding himself that this was a test, not of strength, but of restraint. "I'm not resisting," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I'm not resisting. Just check my wallet. You'll see my ID. You'll see who I am." His words slid past the officers, lost in the tunnel vision of their adrenaline, their misjudgment. The crowd began to gather now, a few slow-moving pedestrians pausing, pulling out their phones, sensing the tension that had erupted from what should have been a mundane night. Anthony's mind raced, but his voice remained calm. Every second stretched like a taut wire, every movement weighted with possibility. He knew this wasn't about him personally, it was about every person who had ever been reduced to a stereotype, every night when assumptions outweighed facts. But tonight, that reality would be laid bare, and the revelation was closer than anyone could imagine. Then, as the officer reached for Anthony's back pocket, a small metallic clink echoed against the asphalt. Denise's eyes widened in recognition. Anthony's hand stayed poised, his calm unbroken. In the fading glow of the streetlights, the wallet slipped, and what followed would stop every heart in its tracks. The metallic clink reverberated like a bell in the cool night air, slicing through the tension like a flash of lightning. Anthony barely flinched as the wallet slipped from the younger officer's grasp and tumbled onto the pavement. Denise's gasp was immediate, sharp, and raw. Time seemed to slow. Every pedestrian's movement froze mid-step. The laughter from the street disappeared, replaced by the quiet hum of distant traffic and the distant echo of flashing sirens in someone else's neighborhood. The wallet lay open, its contents spilling slightly. A few bills, receipts, and then the unmistakable glint of gold. Anthony's heart stayed steady, but his mind ticked over with every possibility, every potential consequence. The officer's boot hovered over the badge, as if unsure whether to pick it up. He bent down slowly, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, illuminating the engraved letters, City of Dallas, Chief of Police. Denise's voice broke through the night like a tidal wave. Look at that. That's his badge." Her tone was a mix of awe and fear, disbelief and vindication. The world around them shifted instantly, as if the air itself had been rearranged. The older officer's face paled beneath the flashlight's harsh beam. His hands, once confident on his partner's shoulder, now trembled slightly. Anthony pressed his cheek against the cold hood for one last moment, then slowly lifted his head, his eyes meeting theirs. Calm, measured, unwavering. His presence filled the space, commanding without a word. "I told you my name," he said softly but firmly. Anthony Rhodess. I am the police chief of this city, and you just put me on the ground like a criminal. The younger officer staggered back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He stumbled over his own words. Chief, we didn't know. Anthony's voice sharpened, though his body remained composed. That's exactly the problem. You didn't ask, you didn't listen, you assumed. The weight of the statement pressed into every corner of the sidewalk. Bystanders murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering into phones already recording. Denise stepped closer, pressing a hand to his shoulder, grounding him, though Anthony barely needed it. His calm alone had become a presence, a force of gravity pulling the chaotic world back toward clarity. The older officer bent over, slightly, fumbling to pick up the badge, as though holding it might absolve him of guilt. He squinted at the engraving, at the authority he had unknowingly violated. The words sank in slowly. The realization of what had just happened, the gravity of it, hit him like a physical blow. The younger officer's flashlight wavered, light falling in jagged patches across Anthony's composed face. Anthony straightened fully, stepping slightly away from the hood, letting his stature and presence speak for him. Do you understand now? His voice was low, but every word carried authority, disappointment, and a quiet, searing anger. Do you understand that to them, I wasn't your chief? I wasn't a husband leaving dinner with his wife? I was just another black man walking to his car at night, and that's all you needed to assume danger? Denise's tears fell silently, trembling against her cheeks as she whispered, Anthony. She wanted to hold him, to shield him, but his calm radiated a different kind of strength. The street, once ordinary and mundane, now felt like the stage for a lesson no one would forget. Bystanders whispered, phones captured every angle, and the hum of passing cars seemed to bow to the intensity of the moment. Anthony's gaze swept the officers, steady and unflinching. Look around you. Everyone here has seen what just happened. Nothing can erase it. Nothing can explain it away. And this is only a glimpse of what so many endure every day without a badge to protect them. The officers sank slightly, their confidence broken, replaced with a dawning comprehension they weren't ready for. Denise pressed a hand gently to Anthony's arm, grounding him, whispering through her own tears, You're okay. You're okay. Anthony picked up the badge from the pavement, sliding it back into his wallet with deliberate care. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable, yet every bystander felt the weight of the moment. Let's go, he said softly to Denise, voice calm, measured, resolute. As he stepped toward the Tahoe, the world around them had already begun to shift. Tonight, the street had borne witness, and nothing, and no one, would see things the same way again. Anthony's hands stayed firm on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening slightly, as the Tahoe glided through the quieter streets of downtown. Denise sat beside him, arms crossed over her chest, her body tense, eyes flicking from the passing neon lights to his calm, unreadable expression. The city felt different now, less like a place they knew, more like a stage where unseen forces had shifted, a landscape of caution and awareness that stretched farther than the street they had just left. Her voice broke the silence, small but trembling. Anthony, you could have been killed. They had no idea who you were. They just slammed you to the ground. She shook her head, trying to push away the image, but her hands betrayed her anxiety, trembling as she gripped her purse. Anthony exhaled slowly, a soft hum of air that carried both resignation and reflection. I know, he said quietly, his eyes on the road, but his mind replaying every motion, every command, every assumption that had led to the shove against his own vehicle. That's why I do this job, Denise. Not for the badge, not for the title, but so someone, anyone, doesn't have to feel that fear alone. Tonight showed exactly how thin the line is between safety and danger for so many people out there. Denise swallowed hard, her gaze falling to the dashboard. But you're the chief. You have a badge, authority, recognition, and they still treated you like that. If they can do it to you. Her voice faltered, the sentence left suspended in the air, unfinished but loaded with unspoken truth. Anthony didn't answer immediately. He let her words hang, letting the weight settle, letting the reality sink in. Finally, he spoke, calm but deliberate. That's exactly it. If it can happen to me, what happens to everyone else who doesn't have a badge or a title to shield them? Tonight, it wasn't about me. It was about every man, every woman, every child who steps outside and is judged before being heard. Every person profiled because of how they look, where they are, or what they drive. Denise's hands tightened in her lap. I saw you. You were so composed, Anthony. You didn't fight back. You didn't argue. I don't know how you stayed calm. He glanced at her briefly, eyes softening just enough to reveal the truth behind his restraint. Because losing my cool would have made everything worse. Every movement, every raised voice, it could have escalated in seconds. Seconds I couldn't afford. And yet, he paused, taking a deep breath. Calm isn't always enough. Awareness isn't always enough. That's why tomorrow matters. Because we can't let this be just a lesson for a chief. It has to be a lesson for all of us, for the department, for the city, for anyone who watches and listens. The streets grew quieter as they passed the more residential sections near Deep Ellum. Neon signs faded into soft amber glows, streetlights casting long orange shadows on the pavement. Denise turned slightly, resting her forehead against the cool glass of the window, as if the night itself could absorb some of her fear. "Do you think they'll try to cover it up?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of every injustice she had ever seen. Anthony exhaled again, slower this time, letting the words come like water over stone. "They can try, but the cameras don't lie, and I won't let them rewrite this night. The videos, the witnesses, they're all proof. Not for me, but for everyone who lives in fear without anyone to speak for them." A pause settled between them, heavy but grounding, filled with the sough, and of the engine humming and the soft rush of passing tires. Denise's hand found his, gripping gently, seeking reassurance. "I was scared for you," she whispered, voice breaking again. "Not because of who you are, but because I realized something tonight. A badge doesn't guarantee safety, and if it can happen to you..." Anthony squeezed her hand gently, not letting go. "That's the truth we have to carry, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. To change hearts, to change policies, to make people see, even when it's uncomfortable, because comfort has never saved lives." They drove in silence for several more blocks, the weight of the night pressing against them. The city around them was alive, indifferent, unaware of the storm that had just passed in its streets. Yet inside the Tahoe, the quiet hum of understanding settled between them. Anthony's mind was already racing ahead, planning the conversations, the meetings, the changes that would have to come. But for now, the night offered only reflection, only the raw, honest acknowledgement of fear, courage, and the fragility of human assumptions. By the time they reached their street, the city's neon and streetlights had faded into the soft glow of home. Denise turned to him one last time, eyes shimmering with tears. "Promise me, Anthony. Promise me you'll make them see. Make them understand." He nodded slowly, determination etched into every line of his face. "I will. Tonight isn't the end. It's the beginning." The morning sunlight cut through the blinds of Anthony's office, sharp and unrelenting, carrying the clarity and scrutiny of a new day. He sat at his desk for a moment, staring at the gold badge resting neatly in its leather case. The events of the previous night played over and over in his mind, not like a movie on repeat, but as a series of vivid, piercing moments that refused to be ignored. The shoves, the fear, Denise's voice trembling, the weight of every assumption made against him, all of it demanded attention, reflection, and action. By 8 a.m., Anthony walked into the department, the sound of his polished shoes echoing off the marble floors. Every eye in the lobby turned, some in recognition, some in curiosity, and others in unease. Whispers slipped through the air like hesitant currents. Did that really happen? The chief? Outside like that? Phones were already lighting up with notifications, social media buzzing with clips from the night before. The videos showed him pressed against his own Tahoe, hands in the air, face near the metal hood, every motion documented, every word captured. He didn't rush. He let the silence swell, letting officers and staff absorb the weight of what had happened. Then he moved into the conference room, leather chair scraping softly as he sat, placing the badge squarely on the polished oak table. The gold glinted in the early sunlight, a quiet, unyielding reminder of authority and responsibility. Across the room, the two officers from the night before sat stiffly at the end of the table. Their faces were pale, eyes flicking between the badge, Anthony's steady gaze, and the growing room of senior officers. The younger officer kept shifting, hands clasped tightly, while the older one avoided eye contact entirely. Anthony's presence was commanding, but not from anger. Every inch of him carried measured, undeniable authority, the kind earned through experience and integrity. "Last night," he began, voice calm but heavy with meaning, "wasn't about me. It was about the culture we allow to grow inside this department. Two of our own treated the chief of police like a criminal before they asked a single question. If that doesn't tell you something, then nothing will." A captain shifted uneasily, breaking the silence. "Chief, they were following protocol, responding to a description." Anthony raised a hand, stopping him. A description, a tall black male, a dark SUV. That's not a description, that's a stereotype. And if you think that excuses what happened, you're part of the problem. His words pressed into the room, filling every corner with accountability. No one moved, no one spoke. He leaned forward, hands resting firmly on the table, eyes sweeping over every officer. I won't ask if you're embarrassed this happened to me. I'll ask something harder. What if it hadn't been me? What if it had been a father driving home from work, a teenager returning from a game, a man just walking to his car? What happens when there's no badge, no recognition, no immediate authority to protect them? The room remained still. The officers at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably, the weight of realization settling like concrete in their chests. Anthony's voice softened slightly, but the conviction never wavered. You need to ask yourselves that question every day for the rest of your careers. Every decision, every assumption, every motion matters. If we can't protect those who are most vulnerable, then what are we even doing here? Denise's words from the previous night echoed in his mind. Make them see. Make them listen. Anthony straightened, picking up his badge. We are changing the way we train, how we supervise, how we hold one another accountable. If you can't handle that, hand me your resignati. On today, this department will not repeat the same mistakes, and I will make sure that everyone, officer, staff, or civilian, understands the value of life, the importance of listening, and the cost of assumptions. Some officers nodded slowly, others avoided his gaze, but the room was silent, reflective, heavy with the weight of truth. Anthony placed the badge back on the table, the gold glinting like a beacon. Change starts with us, he said softly, almost to himself, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. And it starts now. The officers at the end of the table swallowed hard. Anthony stood, his leather shoes clicking against the floor as he walked out, leaving the badge, the responsibility, and the weight of the night for them to carry. The sunlight followed him out, warm yet stark, illuminating a day that promised accountability, reckoning, and the slow, hard work of transformation. The city had already begun to wake, but the echoes of the previous night lingered like a shadow that refused to be ignored. Social media feeds exploded with clips of Anthony Rhodess being slammed against his own Tahoe, videos recorded by bystanders now circulating across every platform. Comments poured in, anger, disbelief, support, fear, outrage, all blending into a chorus too loud to ignore. News anchors replayed the footage with incredulous tones. Dallas police chief mistaken for a suspect during late-night stop. Every replay magnified the tension, the injustice, the undeniable truth. Anthony sat in his office, shoulders squared, the badge lying face down on the polished wood of his desk. Denise had insisted he eat something, but the food had gone cold. His mind raced not with personal indignation, but with a heavier burden. The realization that if this could happen to him, with every officer in the city knowing who he was, then what was happening to countless others who had no shield, no recognition, no voice? The phones in his office buzzed relentlessly. Council M. Embers, community leaders, reporters. Everyone wanted answers. Anthony picked up each call with the same composed calm he had shown on the street, his voice steady, measured, authoritative. Yes, I am fine. Thank you for asking. Let's focus on the larger picture here. Every conversation, though outwardly calm, carried a deeper current. Accountability was coming, and it would not be optional. By mid-morning, Anthony arrived at a community meeting called hastily by local leaders. The room was packed, residents, activists, journalists, all waiting for his words, waiting for a response to the images that had already stirred the city into motion. Denise stood quietly at his side, her hand lightly brushing his back, a silent anchor of support. Anthony looked out across the room, taking in the faces, the expectations, the fatigue of people who had too often borne witness to injustice. He spoke slowly, deliberately, every word carrying the weight of his own experience. What happened last night should not have happened, he began. His eyes scanned the room, meeting individual gazes. But it's not just about me. It's about what too many experience every single day, judged before being heard, assumed guilty because of the color of their skin, their presence in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have to confront this. We have to do better, not just as officers, but as a community, as a city, as human beings. Questions came fast, voices pressing, emotions raw. One woman, her hands shaking, asked, "Chief, how do we know this won't happen again?" Anthony's gaze softened, but his response remained firm. Because we are going to make it unacceptable. Policies will change, training will change, Accountability will change, and most importantly, we will confront the biases we all carry, whether we admit them or not. Back at the station, the two officers from the night before faced their own reckoning. Whispers filled the halls. Some officers avoided them, others stared. Their supervisors demanded written statements, explanations, reflections. The reality of what they had done, how quickly fear and assumption had led them to action, settled over them like a suffocating weight. Anthony, meanwhile, returned briefly to his office, staring out at the city below. Traffic moved steadily. Pedestrians carried on with lives unaware, yet the undercurrent of last night's chaos remained tangible. He knew the battle ahead wasn't just about public perception or media coverage, it was about culture, mindset, and the painstaking work of changing hearts as well as policies. Denise joined him again, quietly handing him a cup of tea. "You were incredible today," she said softly. Anthony's eyes met hers, tired but resolute. "It wasn't about me today. It never was. It was about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else. That's what drives me." She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting pride, fear, and the weight of understanding. As the afternoon sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the office floor, Anthony made notes, drafted memos, and outlined plans. Change wouldn't come in a day, it wouldn't come in a week, but he knew now more than ever that it had to come, and that he would be relentless until it did. Outside, the city moved, unaware that the moment that had begun as chaos now carried the seed of transformation, and Anthony Rhodess, black man and police chief, was standing at the center, determined to see it through. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the conference room floor. Anthony Rhodess walked in with a measured pace, his leather shoes clicking softly against the polished wood. Today was not about headlines or viral videos. Today was about confronting the raw, uncomfortable truths that had been laid bare the night before. Every officer in the room knew why they were here. Every pair of eyes, every breath, carried the weight of what had happened. Anthony placed his badge deliberately on the table, gold edges catching the sunlight, a symbol of authority, but also of vulnerability. "Last night wasn't just a mistake," he began, voice calm but unyielding. "It was a mirror, and it showed us things about our department, about our culture, and about ourselves that we cannot ignore." He looked around, locking eyes with the two officers who had slammed him to the ground. Their shoulders slumped, their gazes downcast. No words could erase the memory of that moment. And now, accountability had a face. He spoke of bias, both conscious and unconscious, of the assumptions that led to action without understanding. "You saw me, a black man, late at night near my own vehicle. And in that moment, the badge you were trained to recognize was not enough to protect me. That's the reality many live every day, without protection, without acknowledgement, without recourse. And if we don't change, if we don't hold ourselves accountable, that reality continues." Questions came, voices breaking with uncertainty. How could this have happened? How could the chief have been treated like a suspect? Anthony didn't mince words. Because fear and assumption are dangerous, because training without reflection is empty, because each of us carries prejudices we must confront before they dictate our actions. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the room feel the gravity of the moment. Then came the plan, the path forward. Policy revisions, mandatory bias training, community engagement, accountability measures. But Anthony knew it wasn't just about rules, it was about hearts and minds. This department will not hide behind procedure to excuse harm. We will teach, we will correct, and we will listen. And if anyone here cannot commit to that, the door is always open. His tone was firm, unflinching, and yet not without compassion. The two officers shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their actions pressing down in ways that no reprimand could fully convey. Anthony allowed the silence to fill the room, knowing that reflection was often heavier than words. Then he looked up, eyes steady, voice calm but resonant. "Remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to be wronged. Let it guide every decision, every encounter, every action you take." Outside, the city moved, unaware that in that conference room, a pivotal moment had taken place. Anthony stepped out afterward, walking into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on his face, but the gravity still pressing in his chest. Denise waited quietly in the car, her hand resting on his as he approached. He slid in beside her, exhaling slowly. "It's done for today," he said, though both knew the work had only begun. The viral videos continued to circulate, sparking conversations far beyond Dallas. But Anthony's focus was clear. Change starts within, and it starts with courage. Courage to confront mistakes, courage to question assumptions, courage to demand justice, not just for himself, but for every person who lacked a badge to protect them. As they drove home, the city unfolding before them, Anthony glanced at Denise. "We've done more than survive last night," he said softly. "We've shown the truth. Now it's time to make it real." She squeezed his hand, eyes reflecting pride, relief, and the unspoken understanding of the long road ahead. That night, as the family gathered for a quiet dinner at home, Anthony placed his badge carefully on the counter, a reminder of the duality of power and vulnerability. "It's not about the badge," he said, voice soft. "It's about what it represents, the responsibility we have to protect, to respect, to act justly." Denise nodded, her hand brushing his shoulder. Outside, the city continued, unaware that one night of Cheo S had ignited a conversation that could not be silenced, a lesson that would resonate far beyond a single street, a single encounter, a single badge. Change, Anthony knew, would not be easy, but it had begun, and for the first time he felt a cautious hope that the city and the hearts within it might just catch up.